Hello again. It's been quite a while, but we're back with another episode of Subs Bench. It's been about 18 months since we were last on the telly, but we're back with a special programme here today. And as usual, we've got one of our important guests, haven't we, Richard? Because we've got a top author on the programme today. None other than Richard Latham. You've been busy while we've been off the television, haven't you?
I absolutely have. I had to find something to do when Subs Bench finished so abruptly, which we were all very disappointed with. So last winter I thought, what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a book. What about? Well, I had some scrapbooks, and the most memorable day of my covering Bristol City has always been 1986, the Freight Rover Trophy final. So I looked at what I had. Plenty of cuttings, plenty of photos. Started off thinking of a coffee table book maybe with lots of photos. Started to write it and it ended up something like 50,000 words around the pictures. So the upshot is, as you've got there.
Yeah, so Wembley Wonders it's called, and it's by Richard Latham. Amazingly, it says the story of Bristol City's historic first visit to the Twin Towers for the 1986 Freight Rover Trophy final. Who would have imagined you could write?
Well, I think I've written a few million words in my time, most of them fish and chip paper. But a book is something I've only done once before, and that was a promotion diary for Bristol City's 1997-98 season, which is a very slim paperback and just featured each match. So I've never written a book in this depth. And when I started it, I had no idea what would it entail. I thought I might get some interviews with some of the players. In fact, I interviewed all the players again that had played in 1986 at Wembley and the two substitutes. So there was only two substitutes allowed in those days, so it's 13 players in the squad, plus a couple of others who were travelled as well. The great thing about it for me was, thanks to Terry Cooper, who was manager at the time, I was able to sit on the bench at Wembley rather than in the press box. Yeah. And that is something, I mean, journalists these days will never ever get to do again, because as you know now, we deal with media offices rather than managers, and nobody's as close to the club as they were in those days. I used to travel with the team on the team coach to every game, home and away, for the Bristol Evening Post. And when it came to Wembley, I remember being in Terry's office one day and I said, I don't suppose there's any chance I could sit with you on the day, could I? And typical of TC, thought for a moment, I said, well, if you can arrange it, do it. Okay. So secretly I arranged it, and I got a ticket for Wembley that had everything. I could go anywhere, dressing rooms everywhere. So on the Friday I travelled with the team, stayed at the same hotel, travelled to Wembley on the team coach, went in the dressing room before the game at half time, on the pitch with them beforehand, in the dressing room again at the end, and watched the game just behind Terry Cooper on the bench. So it was an absolutely memorable experience.
Yeah, it was a particularly memorable game for Bristol City fans because 4 years earlier, basically the club had gone bust really, and it looked like it might not even exist. And in a very short space of time, they were at Wembley for the first time in their history. It's incredible, really, isn't it?
Well, it was like a rebirth of the club. All they'd had in between was a promotion in fourth place in the fourth division. At one point, they were bottom of the entire Football League when Terry took over, just after Terry took over in December 1982. So it was like the club almost went out of business in 82, as we all know, and the Ashton 8 saved the club by tearing up their contracts, and they're mentioned in the book because, as I said, without them this wouldn't have happened. So it's basically the chance for all the people who supported City in the First Division days, when they were getting crowds of 28, 30,000, to come back, because even in the Fourth Division, for example, when they won promotion at Chester, I was there when they won promotion at Chester in the Fourth, the whole crowd was 3,000. So how many Bristol City fans were there? I don't know. Yeah. The ones who did partied, but this was the chance for the big party, and suddenly 30,000 people came out and bought tickets to make the crowd of 54,000 on the afternoon, and it was just an incredible response. I think it took everybody at the club by surprise. I think they thought they might get 15,000, 20,000, but it turned out to be nearer 30,000. And it was like a rebirth. Everybody partied and celebrated that Bristol City had sort of come again as a club when they nearly went out of business 4 years earlier. This
competition in its various guises over the years has often been derided, particularly in the early stages of it, but it's when you get to the latter stage and you get to the final that there have been some very impressive attendances, haven't there? And City was maybe the first incarnation of that, weren't they?
I was as guilty as anybody, because the first round of the season they won it, they played Plymouth Argyle. In those days there was groups of 3, would you believe? So they played 2 games and the little mini groups, and the top the top of the group went through. So they started with a goalless draw against Plymouth, and I basically wrote a story writing off the competition, writing off the game, which was awful, saying that even though there was a Wembley final, it didn't offer any motivation in its early stages. This group system didn't work, and it was such a negative report, which is in the book. And I had to admit, that we all get it wrong. Even you get it wrong sometimes, and I happened to on that occasion. It was, next thing I knew, after that, or no, I think it was it when was this now? The season before was the first time it'd been a Wembley final, and that had meant that suddenly there was 40,000 people there for Wigan against Brentford, I think it was. Yeah. Before that, the final had been played on one of the club's home grounds, and they were gates between about 4,000 and 6,000 for the final. Suddenly, when it was Wembley, all these people went 40,000. Well, that's what I'd overlooked, really, that this competition did have something to offer now, because when you got to that stage, it could save your season, it could be financially boost you for the following season. City ended up making about £100,000 or more, which doesn't sound much these days, but at that time was a hell of a lot of money. When you think Terry Cooper was signing players for 10,000, to make £100,000 from one competition was a huge thing. So I wrote it off a bit prematurely.
So in the book, you set out, obviously, there's some great photos in the book, and you set out a little bit about the competition, don't you? But then you go through the characters. So we haven't got time to list absolutely everybody, but pick out one or two of the examples of the people who you remember and how they reacted to being at Wembley.
Well, Terry Cooper was a lot of the book is about Terry. I mean, he was just the most amazing character to deal with, and still is. He was so funny. He made football really fun. And there are some descriptions of his career in there, and his England, playing for England. I mean, you're talking about a bloke who was one of the best attacking fullbacks England ever produced, without any question. Although he was managing at a low level, of course, he'd managed Bristol Rovers unsuccessfully. In fact, he said to me, I cocked them right up. He said, because it was his first management job. And he basically, when City approached him, he basically said to them, God, I'm surprised you want me after what happened at Rovers. But anyway, City did want him, and what he proved to be was a genius with no money. He could silver tongue people to come to the club. He could silver tongue the supporters, the players he wanted to sign on promises. Sometimes they weren't always kept, about wages in the future and all that. But he was such a character. And when I would ring him from the Evening Post every morning, we'd end up usually in fits of giggles or laughter, because he'd say something about a player or something, and he knew I wouldn't write it if I didn't think it was right, And we had such a good relationship. But when he talks about himself playing for England, which he didn't do very often, unless you pressed him, there's some wonderful stuff in there about when England played Brazil in the 1970 World Cup, and he walked out alongside Pelé, and lovely line he came up with, that he was stood in the tunnel to come out, and he said, I suddenly realised I'm alongside Pelé. And he said, the size of him was unbelievable, my height, but his thighs were like tree trunks and all this thing. And then Pelé said to me, all the best, Cooper. And he said, God, Pelé knows my name. And that's how he felt walking out for England against Brazil. But that's the sort of story Terry would tell. And I hope they come across well in writing, because when he tells them himself, he's astonishingly funny.
That being said, it was such a great occasion for Bristol City. He could easily have been the one who would have just looked down his nose at this competition, because he'd been there to the World Cup, he'd played in Wembley finals before. So for him, it wasn't special. It was the Mickey Mouse Cup, I suppose. Could have been, couldn't it? But clearly he realised the impact it was going to have on his players and the rest of the club.
Well, another funny story about Terry was that he let Clive Middlemass, his assistant, lead the team out of Wembley, which is typical of him. Because he'd played there, he wanted to give Clive a bit of glory, because Clive was his loyal number two and did a lot of the work there. But after the game, of course, all through the afternoon, he was basically in tears. Once he saw the crowd, he took one look at the crowd and almost broke into tears. And he was in tears on the bench when they were winning 3-0 and thinking, we're going to win this trophy. And then after the game, he was in tears. And when he was interviewed by Ian Seymour for ITV, famously, he turned away from the camera and said, I can't talk to you, Ian, I'm in tears. About a week later, the players started to ask for how much money they were going to get out of the final, and he said, "What do you want money for? It's only the bloody Freight Rover trophy." He'd had the most emotional. He was saying it's the most emotional day of my life when he was out at Wembley. So he put it ahead of all his England appearances. It was wonderful. It really did affect him.
Yeah, and the players themselves, they obviously, presumably, you went with them the day before and went round the stadium and inspected it. And
that was wonderful. The day before, we went into the stadium with it empty. City trained there before Bolton did. It was Friday afternoon, and I think we went straight from Ashton Gate, if I remember right. The coach went straight to Wembley before it went to the hotels. They were all in their tracksuits. But walking up the tunnel and seeing Wembley empty was just unbelievable. Everyone was like, it was almost like there was a hush. Everybody looked like it was like being in a cathedral almost. Just everyone looked around. Anyway, then they started training, and while they were training, Bolton arrived to do their training. So there was a bit of banter. They were shouting at City players training, and Terry was shouting back at them. And watching was Nat Lofthouse, who of course, for anyone of our time, we revere Nat Lofthouse as one of the great strikers England ever produced, and he was Bolton Wanderers through and through. That was his only club as a player.
He was a club president.
And he was manager at one point as well. But this time he was just with them, and so he was watching the training session. So you got him watching, and quietly someone brought the trophy in. I think it was maybe for media reasons or something. So that was going on. But I was basically stood on the side watching Clive put the players through their paces. Terry loved it, and the directors. So Des Williams, the chairman, Les Q, and Ivor Williams, and one or two of the other directors, they all got a ball out and started kicking it around. So they could say they played at Wembley as well. So it was just an amazing thing to be in there and look around this amazing stadium with it empty. And of course, all the history of the place. This is the old Wembley, and so much history. And of course, City's first visit. And that's what really was the point of the book. Is it's a historic. It'll never happen again. Bristol City's first ever visit to what was the Wembley Stadium.
Yeah. So, unless anybody thinks that they were just playing a nobody team, there were some names on the opposition, weren't there? Because Phil Neal was the manager, wasn't he? Who was a rival of Terry in the old First Division, but he played for Liverpool. Terry played for Leeds, obviously, and there was a certain Sam Allardyce somewhere in the Bolton lineup, wasn't there?
Well, he wasn't. He didn't play, but he was sat virtually next to me on the bench because he was substitute. He was a substitute at that time. So I think Sam was coming towards the end of his playing career, if I remember rightly. But he was sat just along, so the two benches were side by side, and so I'm sat here with Lee Rogers and Mickey Tanner, I think it was, who were the. Certainly Lee Rogers was there, who was like 14th man for City, and Andy Llewellyn and Gary Marshall, the substitutes. Along was the Bolton bench, just to our left, and Sam Allardyce was sat there. They also had Asa Hartford, who was again at the end of his playing career, but was player coach. Phil Neal was player manager, so both Phil Neal and Asa Hartford played. Asa had won 50 caps for Scotland, played in World Cups. And poor old Terry Cooper, I remember him saying to me just before the game started, about half an hour before, he saw the team sheets with Phil Neal and Ace Hartford, and he said, do you think it's too late for me to be substitute? Because he hadn't long finished himself, Terry. No. But so while Phil Neal and Ace Hartford could affect the game on the field, Terry had to sit and watch and suffer, certainly the first half, because the way the game started, Bolton were by far the better side for 20 minutes. Mark Gavin, who was later to join Bristol City, had Rob Newman on toast, as Rob will admit, and it does admit in the book, and until Rob kicked him up into the stand almost in the 20th minute. These days he'd have been sent off. He sent Mark Gowan into orbit with a tackle, and Mark wasn't quite as effective after that. They had a very good game, and later joined City and was part of a promotion team for Bristol City. Yeah. But certainly the game didn't go according to plan to start with. It was first 20 minutes, Bolton hit the crossbar, I think, went very close to a couple of other goals, and City didn't really get going. And then the turning point came 5 minutes before half-time, and Glyn Riley scored. So just before the break, City had just about got on top by then, but that was the goal that really turned it. And then second half, when they scored the second, which was a brilliant goal, the second and third goals were just like any team would have been proud of them at Wembley. That was what was so nice. It was a beautiful afternoon. City eventually played some fantastic football. Last two goals were sweeping moves out of defence right up the other end of the field. Steve Neville was man of the match. He was dazzling. Glyn scored the two goals, and Howard Pritchard scored a goal. And by, 10, 15 minutes to go, it was 3-0, and everybody could enjoy the last 15 minutes.
My main memory of the game was Glyn Riley having scored, running behind the goal, and then trying to leap over the advertising hoarding, and he got cramped, didn't he, and ended up on his back and in a lot of trouble.
That. The other players loved it. And Glyn will laugh at it now, but he still managed to do his own. I remember, I can see him now, he's facing the fans, he's on the ground, and then he goes to get up, and grabs his calf, and I think it was Steve Neville said to me that one of the ball boys had to give him treatment before someone else got, so he could get up and carry on with the game. Of course, the other players, by that time, they knew they'd won. It was a brilliant goal. I mean, Steve Neville chip into the box at the end of a great move down the pitch, and Glyn's virtually unmarked and very exciting. He headed it past the goalkeeper into the roof of the net. And they were all up off the bench then, and you know, we can relax, it's 3-0. Yeah. Not everybody relaxed. David Moyes said to me that he was still going around saying, to everybody, and they were just laughing in his face because I still thought with 3-0 up we weren't entirely safe. But, so that's how competitive David Moyes was as a player.
Well, despite the fact that you wrote it, I'm really looking forward to reading this, because this is literally hot off the press. It's only just been delivered, hasn't it? So we thought we'd get the first interview in and talk about the book.
Another Subspench exclusive.
But I've got something for you, Richard, but because here's my memory of the game. This is Bristol City Wembley winners, and I was at the game for Radio Bristol together with Chris Garland, my co-commentator, and that is actually the commentary of the game, which I looked out before I came to see you today.
I'm not surprised as it was you commentating, but I've never seen this before. I don't know anyone who's got it, but if you have, the book could be much better.
a few people bought it. My memory of that, Chris Garland, bless him, before whenever City did something good, or certainly when they scored, I was commentating, you could hear him go, yeah, ooh, in the background, which is not what co-commentators are meant to do, but still, it was a.
You never got that with Kenneth Wolstenholme, did you?
No, not often. No. Finally, Richard. So Wembley Wonders. It's out now, so as they say, but you've actually got a book launch coming up, haven't you? Tell us a little bit about it.
It really goes on sale on November the 1st at Ashton Gate. Bristol City have very kindly let me have use of the sports bar, which is the main bar as you go in off the Winterstoke Road entrance and the car park there. At 7 o'clock on the November the 1st, a Thursday night, we're going to have a sort of media hour and the good thing is that a lot of the players from the Wembley will be there. I can't say all of them. There's one or two not in the best of health at the moment. Steve Neville lives in Australia, so I'm afraid
can't he make the effort?
He's probably a doubtful starter. But I would think we might get at least 9 or 10 of the 13 that were on duty, including the 2 substitutes. David Moyes certainly has said he's coming. Wow. Keith Curley went on to play for England, has said he's coming, has just been made Northampton Town manager, so he's been in the news recently, Keith. But he went on to play 3 times for England, at full England international. So we didn't know then that our 2 centre-backs were one was Keith, who would go on to play for England, and one was David Moyes, who'd go on to Manchester United, and even more praiseworthy Everton manager. So I'm a secret Everton supporter, so we always have a bit of fun over that. But yeah, so Everton and Manchester United manager and a future England international, so they were the centre back. So you just didn't know what was happening. And Rob Newman, who played at right back, has been part of Manchester City's success story because he's been very heavily involved in their European scouting for many years. So there's little stories like that we'll talk about on the night, and it'll be a chance. So what I want people to do basically is there's no obligation to buy the book when they come. It'll be on the sale on the night, but come along and meet these guys. Come and say hello to Glyn Riley again, and Howard Pritchard and Alan Walsh and David Moyes and all these people. They're looking so forward to meeting City fans again and reminiscing. It's going to be a night of nostalgia. We had a reunion dinner. Alan Walsh organised one actually in 1996, and I organised one in 2011, and they were both phenomenally successful. They were dinners, but this is basically going to be the chance for supporters to mingle again with, if you went to the final, come and tell us your memories about it, talk to the players about it. No obligation to buy the book, but it is on sale at £20 on the night, and I hope as many people will buy it, and of course get it signed by the players who are there. So please come along, many of you as possible. If you don't want to buy the book, no problem. If you do, you can get it signed by probably 8 or 9 of the team that played. Well,
Richard, it's been a pleasure chatting through it with you and getting back on I was going to say the Subspench couch, but we're in 2 chairs anyway. Thanks for the memories, so to speak, and I'm looking forward to reading this. I'm glad that you've not wasted your time since we've been off the air anyway. So well done, congratulations on the book.
Thanks a lot, mate.